Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me and see my screen and everything? We're good to go. There's India. Awesome. Very cool. Fantastic. Excellent. 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 Okay. Awesome. Cool. So let's just get this session started. I don't know if I've got a full hour-long presentation, so I think we're going to leave some room open for Q&A, either in the chat or I'm probably just going to join one of the tables and we can talk. Happy to kind of further discuss these sort of product designer, product market fit sort of discussions. But before we even get into the session today, I want to welcome everybody. Congratulations, you've made it to the end of week 2 of the fellowship. This is amazing. I've been talking to a whole bunch of people in the space. A bunch of really interesting things are being built. A lot of really interesting people coming in to kind of explore the Arweave ecosystem. It's really, really exciting. Again, if you're not sure what you're building, reach out to Sam or myself. So our Discord handles are there, Arweave-Sam and just Zach. We would love to talk. We've been brainstorming with people who have kind of been trying to come up with different ideas or different possibilities. Also, be sure to check out the opportunities board on community.xyz. There are already some really cool projects in the space, and they already have PSTs available for contributors. So if you want to get involved with a project that's already going, I would strongly encourage you to check that out. There have been some amazing stuff. I got kind of an inside scoop. There's actually some amazing stuff going on that's going to be launching within the next 2 to 6 weeks, maybe till the end of the fellowship. But it's really exciting. A lot of opportunities are going to be added, but there's already some amazing opportunities to get involved. If you are an established project or you're working on something and we haven't talked about milestones for the fellowship, please reach out too. We would love to know what you're working on. We would love to kind of have some ideas on how we could support you, et cetera. So please reach out. I think the bottom line is essentially reach out, because we would love to make sure that we are kind of supporting you in a way that is that's useful. Hold on, let's just see notes. There we go. I want to make sure I'm covering everything. So first off, welcome to my talk, Biddle Faster. This is, I think, an old slide. Ignore the spelling joke from, I think this is like a 2018 joke, right? Which is 1,000 years ago in the crypto space. But this is a crash course in product design. So that is essentially what I am. About me, I'm a product designer and a design strategist by trade. What is a strategist? It's just a fancy way of saying I help teams get out of their own way. I look at problems from the outside of the team's own head, and then prioritize the most important thing and ignore the rest. I think when you're building a product, it's really important. It's important to understand that there are literally thousands of things you could be doing when you're building a company. Thousands of things. Usually there's only 1 to 3 things that you should actually be focusing on, right? Building a company is about managing time and energy and money, money being kind of an extension of those two. You have a certain amount of runway before you decide. I was just talking in the tables earlier about people who are working on these things on nights and weekends, right? That means that your constraints are even more severe. And so it becomes really important to focus on kind of that 80-20, that thing that's really important. I've been working as an advisor and a consultant for 4.5 years. Before that, for another 8 years as in-house product. So Web 2 space, I've worked for a bunch of different companies. First 2 are pixelated because of NDAs, but also some places I can talk about: MuleSoft, GE Global Research, Dell, EMC, Ellie Mae, Sovereign, Survey Gizmo. In the Web3 space, I feel like I've had a pretty decent opportunity to collaborate with a whole bunch of different types of projects within the decentralized web and crypto space. A lot of it has to do with my involvement with Consensus. I was at Consensus for 2.5 years. That's actually how I got into crypto in the first place. But I've also had some opportunities to work with some really killer teams outside of the Consensus ecosystem as well, including now Arweave. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm really impressed with kind of everything that's being built. So first things first, right? This is a crash course in design. Let's just talk about the purpose of design. Let's do the old definition of design. I'm sorry, this is an old slide too. The purpose of design is to make things look nice. This is actually something, I feel like this was kind of the feeling kind of the consensus of what design was 5 years ago. It was kind of thought of as UI. I think that's when everyone was kind of calling themselves UI designers as opposed to UX designers or product designers. I think at this stage, however, it's less about making things look nice and it's more about wasting less time. Is kind of how I feel about that. And in fact, like this is not the end all be all. It's actually a purpose of design. There's plenty of other types of design, right? There's generative design, there's innovation design, there's service design, et cetera. But I think at this stage that you're in right now, building products for people, I think a wasting less time and getting to the most direct route is a way to really think about the service, kind of like the purpose of design at this stage. So the TLDR is that it's really easy to build the wrong thing. And it's also really expensive. It's really, really expensive, especially whenever you think about the number of people it takes to get a product to market. And then you multiply the number of people by the hours, by the hourly rate. It becomes really expensive to build the wrong thing. And yet working in corporate America for a little bit, it happens all the time. Why is that? Well, design, UX, and research is often perceived as difficult, expensive, time-consuming, and the last step of the process. And I think that is kind of related to, remember, like the previous slide when he said it's meant to look nice. I think when we think design is meant to make the thing look nice, we tend to leave it for the last step, whereas it actually can bring a lot to bear. So if the purpose of design at this step in the process is to waste less time, what kind of time is commonly wasted? Like, how are we solving for that? Well, the kind of time that's commonly wasted, especially for like kind of early stage projects or projects that are highly complex, or you're not necessarily building, you are not necessarily the users that you're building for, time to build. So wasted engineering effort. This is kind of where you're just building the wrong solution in the first place. Time to market. Overly complex business and system plans. It's really easy to come to a product idea kind of fully realized, and this idea of like, man, if they're working, they spend 2 years on this product, we can get all this data, we can return all of this value, is going to be amazing, and we get to market with kind of an overly complex product without necessarily like really sharpening that value prop. Time to deliver value to customers, I think, is one of the most under talked about, but also one of the most important pieces of. Oh, okay. Sorry, I was sorry that I saw the chat, but it's also one of the most important pieces to consider. Everyone likes to kind of even as a designer, I'm guilty of this sometimes, design for like that filled state. So it's like when everybody's in and we have all of these things, this is what it's going to look like fully populated. But we don't necessarily think about, well, what does it look like when someone comes in and it's completely empty? It's called the empty state design. Whenever people sign up for your product, you give them a 14-day trial, they're probably not going to wait until the end of the 14 days to decide whether or not there was value delivered and they want to retain that service. They're going to be deciding within the first 5 days, within the first 3 days, sometimes within the first hour. So we have to really hone in on that value delivery mechanism and make sure that people are experiencing the value that your product provides as early as possible into the process. There really needs to be like designing that aha moment where they suddenly realize the superpower that they get using the thing that you're building needs to come as early as possible, which is pretty darn cool. So how does product design address these problems? So it focuses the product to the most compelling value prop. It understanding user needs prunes features. So if you understand what they're trying to solve in the first place, you're able to pare the product down into a really tightly focused, really concise MVP, which is pretty great. And then ensures that user flows are as straightforward as possible. This solves the time to build piece as well. I was at a company 7 years ago. They had a very ad hoc process. Their sign-up flows, because they had 5 different services. They had 5 different sign-up flows, and all of them had about 4 to 6 steps in between each other. And so essentially, like, designing that experience was a matter of getting all of the different sign-up flows onto a single board, kind of working through with the developers like what each of these achieved and consolidating them down into 3 steps. Our retention got a lot better; it skyrocketed, and there were fewer people kind of slipping through the cracks. So sometimes it's just about consolidation and iterating off of kind of ad hoc sort of experiences. So that's how product design addresses these. One of my favorite quotes, so strategic design is ultimately about making good bets. We talked earlier about not wasting time. Daniel Burka is a designer I really like. I think he said this 7 or 8 years ago, and it stuck in my head. Design is the scientific method for businesses and products, which I really like, especially how we think about it, right? So this is kind of how I think about it. If you've read Ray Dalio's principles, you might recognize sort of this loop. I think you'll maybe also see this in like Jake Knapp's Google Sprint. There's a couple of others too, but this is kind of how it works. You have the evaluate, you have understand, define, ideate, prototype, and then evaluate, right? So it's just a really tight loop. And you'll notice that like where you start out on understand and where you end on evaluate is higher up on that chart. Now, where are you actually building to? You're building towards certainty, right? So whenever you first start out and you first realize, you kind of like get that idea as far as like the problem space that you could be working in, you are starting, or you should be starting, relatively low in the certainty space, right? Like you have an idea, you think it's pretty cool, but you yourself can't be the only person using it, right? You have to get other people using the product in order for it to be a success. And you don't know if people want it until they start like giving you feedback. You start getting signals back from the market. So the purpose of design is to sort of like create these really tight iterative loops to get you as close to certain as possible to where you're comfortable moving forward. The two ways in which we do this are research and prototyping. The very first way, research, build things and talk to users. This is actually how, again, I think some people, like most people think about research, we think about usability tests, and that's whenever we build a thing, we put it in front of someone and we say, essentially, like, what do you think? Do you think this is worth your time? Do you think you would actually use this? But actually what it, like a better way to think about it is you build things with users. So when I say research, a lot of people think usability tests, not so. There are 3 different types: formative, evaluative, and generative. So ultimately, if you're building the kinds of products that aren't specifically meant for your use case, so you're going to need to talk to people who will be using it. Even if you are the user, I think I've talked to so many developers in the past who are building, and they say something to the effect of, they say one of 2 things. They either say, I'm my own user, or they say everyone is my user. And I think both of those present unique problem sets that I don't think are immediately apparent whenever you're starting to build. If I kind of already covered it. If you're your own user and you're building it for yourself, that's great for kind of a side project. That's great for experimenting or building to learn. I think those are all excellent things. But if you're trying to build a company around it, you have to first validate that there are enough people exactly like you who want the thing, who think about the thing and the problems in their space in the exact manner that you do, right? And if you say, like on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you say everyone is my user, that gives you a really unique problem, because if everyone's your user and you haven't really done the work of talking to people or consolidating your user market down, suddenly all features are equally important, and it makes it really, really difficult to focus or to prioritize. Suddenly, like, you are doing 1,000 things at once, because if everyone's your user, then you're trying to serve everyone, and everyone has unique needs. So user research does 2 things really, really well. It helps you cut things down. It helps focus the product, and then it also helps you expand into markets that you didn't actually know were possible. We found multiple times that the people that we thought we were building this for weren't the people that actually wanted to use it. We discovered completely new markets based off of kind of these early formative user research interviews. And I have, if you're interested, I actually have like kind of boilerplate user research scripts. So if this is something that you're interested in, I have like a whole appendix at the back of further reading. And then I have a whole bunch of templates and tool sets. If this is of interest to you, I'm happy to share. Common research mistakes, and shout outs to Katie Johnson for this slide. This is, I gave a similar talk. I think it was earlier on in the process, because we were talking to people who just had ideas over at ETH Denver. This is a slide actually from our presentation with her on that, and I can give you that link if you want it. But this is common research mistakes: not doing any research. So talking to one person. Oh yeah, I will absolutely share the Discord. So not doing any research. So talking to one person is better than talking to zero people. You can actually on like usability tests. There's actually a diminishing return. So when I say like test your product out, I'm not saying test it out with 100 people. You actually like 8 is about the sweet spot. You can find about 90, 80, 85% of the usability problems with about 8 user tests. It also is a good way for market signal. So if I say, go do 8 usability tests with potential users, and then you say, I'm really struggling to find 8 people, that might be a problem when you're trying to build out a user base as well, right? So something to consider. Another problem would be consulting friends or not addressing your potential market. Spending too much time on any one phase of research. I think that goes for design as well. I think like going back, right? Like we said, like some of the misconception of design is that it takes too long and it's too expensive. I think there needs to be kind of forcing points, right? Like you can spend a lot of time just sort of like noodling on ideas, but you don't actually there needs to be a point where you actually execute. And so I think that kind of avoiding, giving yourself like really tight constraints, focusing on that iterative loop is a way to avoid that. Also saying research is not my job. I have heard this from people in the past. I think honestly, especially if you're a solo founder or you're a founder of 2 or 3, research is your job in the same way that business development is your job, that marketing is your job. If you're building a business, like if you're building a business or a product, all of these things are your job until like hopefully you can start delegating. So these are all important things to consider. For prototyping is the other kind of piece to the pie, and this is I think a little bit more familiar, especially to programmers, right? Like when I say prototyping, I think as developers we have this idea of prototyping out, kind of like we have ideas of prototyping, and this is actually not far off from kind of like the common definition of it. Instead, I think of sketching out the experience, however, instead of the UI. Blockchain especially, right? Like with DWeb and blockchain, there are dynamics, there are product dynamics that are outside of the pane of glass, right? That people are using. It's an asynchronous technology in the first place, right? So you can't just like, if you build out a prototype and they hit, like send transaction, and then the prototype immediately sends it, that's an unrealistic expectation. You actually have to need to program in like some delay up to 15 seconds or a minute and a half, depending on how congested the network is, to accurately simulate the experience. And so where people would say if it's saved automatically, they'd be really into this design that you're building out. If you built in like a minute of waiting, are they as interested? Like prototyping gets us to like a reasonable form of believability to where we can accurately assess whether or not people are actually interested in the thing you're building. The way I think about it, prototypes aren't necessarily viable. In fact, I think early on they shouldn't be. If we started building out a scooter, like for a certain setting, I wouldn't try to actually build a scooter. I'd look, this is how I think about prototyping. I'd look for a pallet mover, right? Like it's the same type of experience. It sort of simulates for like, does the road work? Are all of these sort of external factors, are people comfortable with it? This is kind of how I think about prototyping. We want to get to like a reasonable simulation of it without investing a whole bunch of time and effort and energy into something when we can spend like a fraction of that and actually build it out. So what are prototypes? Are they wireframes? Are they clickable mockups? Proof of concept code? Yes, they are all of these things. We get to use a whole bunch of different tool sets as a product designer in this space. It actually is kind of dictated by what are you evaluating. So on the left-hand side, we have concepts, market interest, customer behavior. On the right-hand side, we have specific solutions. So I would say that like this is kind of like a spectrum of maturity, product maturity, how you're thinking about it, and basically like the types of prototypes that you can use start out really broad whenever you're validating concepts, market interests, customer behavior, and then kind of narrow down as you get closer and closer to like the actual specific solution that people want. And again, like I think the danger is to look at this and go like, oh man, he's talking about like months of design. I'm not talking about months of design. I think you can get from one end of that linear spectrum to another in about 2 to 3 weeks, pretty quickly, and save yourself essentially months of development if you are targeting the wrong market. So when you are testing concepts, so again, concepts, market interest, customer behavior, man, the sky's the limit. You can use a whole bunch of really interesting tools to validate these sort of like big, broad questions of whether or not you're even working in the right space. Storyboards, I think, are people don't talk a whole lot about them, but I think they're just fascinating to use because you are essentially presenting a story. It does two things. It presents kind of like the full context of how it's supposed to work. But it also lets you, it also helps clarify your thinking. So you're not just thinking about the pane of glass or like the interface that they're actually doing that work on. Like you're thinking about the before, the during, and the after. And so it's actually a really powerful way to sort of clarify your thinking. And if you're working with other people, give everyone kind of like collapse sort of the possibility field down into like a single discrete experience, and it gets everyone kind of on the same page, which I really like. Blogs and squeeze pages. So before you build out a thing, you can actually start building interest in the process as well. You can create content to gauge interest. Use each blog post as a split test for features and niches. It also kind of has the double effect. I always look for like opportunities to double up on tasks, right? And so if you're building a company, you're not just wanting to validate the market, but you're also wanting to start build your beta list, your potential customers list. These type of marketing plays are a good way to gauge interest in the market, but then also start building out the customer list for early customers as well. So ways to double up are really important. Cheap marketing buys. This is a really interesting way to do things. You essentially can come up, if you're not sure about different concepts, you can create different marketing campaigns really cheaply on something like Facebook or I don't know, but I think Brave has a pretty high ceiling. I was just heard about that. But then you basically see which has the higher click-through rate. This is a really interesting way to test the value proposition of the product that you're building in the first place. And then games, I think, is the final one. This is especially useful for token economics. Most crypto projects are markets. That means that there's two sides, meaning that you either have to do research on both sides of the market, or you can create games where there's a relatively low cost of entry, and then while you still sort of impose these realistic-ish conditions, see if people behave in the way you're expecting. See if people value the things that you're expecting them to value. TC Party, I think, was actually a really interesting experiment on this. And there's just it's a fun way to approach that. As you start getting more and more opinionated on testing solutions, the band narrows. So the higher fidelity of the solutions you're testing, these are wireframes, clickable prototypes, Figma, InVision, Framer, or code. And I put in parentheses, finally, again, arriving at this maybe a week after on a really tight, really focused design sprint. So not a ton of time, but you can still get to this point relatively quickly. I've been using Sketch and InVision a lot, I think, for a lot of time, but I've just recently transitioned to Figma, and it's amazing. And it's also free. It's got a freemium model to where you can start kind of clicking around. So if you wanted to, I use it for everything. I use it for workshops. Idea generating workshops. I also use it for wireframing and finalized design. And it has like a certain amount of animation, so you can kind of simulate the application itself. But really, really cool. If people are interested in kind of like a crash course or walkthrough of Figma and like specifically wireframing prototype, hit me up and I'm happy to provide that as well. How do I know I'm done? This is I feel like a question that we get asked a lot. Again, a lot of times people are kind of slow on the design train because they're like, this could take forever. I don't know if I want to do this. I don't know. Like I feel like coding is like the productive act, and design is the unproductive act. So how do I know when I'm done enough with design that I can actually start making the thing? I would push the question back to you. Like, what's the end goals of this project? Are you building a company? Are you building to learn? Are you building to network? I think especially like your day job, it's pretty apparent, right? Like you're building either a company or you're building features to support the company. But on your nights and weekends, right? Like I think it's important to know what you're about and know what you're building, so that you're have the right incentives around, and you have like kind of the right goals in mind whenever you're building this stuff out. So I'm going to assume though, we have an amazing platform, Communities XYZ. We have a really exciting concept of this profit sharing token. So I'm assuming a lot of you here are here to build a company, build a product that people are going to use, and that you could theoretically make it your full-time job, make it your full-time job to kind of build this out. So that's kind of what I'm working on. So in that case, what makes a good bet for a company that you're building? So every step of this project has different metrics, but a simple project side measurement, I use this pretty basic napkin math. It's basically how long does it take to know whether or not it's not viable. And again, the whole purpose of design is to shorten that kill box so that you're spending less time on things that aren't viable and more time on things that are viable. How much could you make working for someone else over that period of time? So it's then opportunity cost. So then you take the time that you're spending on a project that you do or do not know is viable, times the opportunity cost. That equals the amount of money you're essentially betting that this is worth building. That's kind of how I think about it. So I think, like, if I'm spending my nights and weekends on this project, like I have let's make it easy. I'm spending 10 hours a week on it with $100 hourly rate that makes it $1,000 for a month. That's $4,000. Am I comfortable betting $4,000 that this is something worth building? So that's kind of a really simple way of forcing kind of like some market realities on your time. And again, I think it's important to recognize that there's value outside of like monetary value, right? Like if you're building to learn, not only can it help you get jobs in the future, it improves your earning potential, but also learning in and of itself is an immensely rewarding activity. So I don't necessarily want to reduce everything down into the economic sense, but I do want, it's been helpful for me at least to kind of give myself a little bit of a framework to measure opportunities by. This brings me to kind of the interstitial slide for uncomfortable honesty. I recognize I dumped a ton of information on you, but then B, I am speaking from a perspective of someone who's been a product designer for 12 years. I have spent a lot of time reading about this. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I have a lot of opinions. In case you haven't been able to tell, or if you haven't noticed, I have a lot of opinions on this. But I also recognize that expertise, when we're experts or we're really interested in something, we tend to filter the rest of the world through that lens, right? Like we start seeing everything through the lens of design, everything through the lens of product or of development, or whatever our passion is, we kind of filter those things through it. And so I just want to acknowledge that as robust as these techniques are, and I think as responsible as they are for some really compelling products in the space, and they are really immensely capable tools of saving you time, of helping you innovate. They're not silver bullets. There is no silver bullet to completely de-risk your project. Why? It's because even if you have the best idea or the smartest developers or the most solid process, we're not completely in control. And so I just want to acknowledge that. If it comes down to thinking about doing something or doing something, I would say err on the side of doing something. You don't have a designer, don't have time, need to move fast, go for it. I would just say, just understand that there are benefits to giving space and room for early research and design before committing too hard to an idea. That's really all I'm saying. Be open to making that space and utilizing these cross-disciplinary techniques to arrive at a better solution. Great products have been made. Products are typically made of asymmetric insights. So if you go with that first idea you have without understanding the people you're building for, you're going to end up with a product that looks pretty similar to other products in the market, just by way of you are kind of using the same sort of primitives that everyone else is whenever you think about a market or the type of vertical that you're kind of moving into. So unique insights are how you differentiate yourself in the market, and it's how you build much more concisely, much faster, and much more pointedly. So I don't want to overemphasize the value of these practices to the point of paralysis. Analysis paralysis, I think, is kind of the dark side of design, and I do not want to, especially in kind of a scrappy community like this. I think, sometimes you just have to build and see what happens, especially if you can get it done in a weekend. I also want to encourage you to step back, though. So take a breath and ask yourself, what am I trying to build? What I want out of this, and what's the best way to go about it. I was looking through my my Twitter feed and I saw this. I think I retweeted this specifically because I saw this in relation. These are the thoughts I've been having recently, and I saw this and I was like, oh, that's so true. Like the world, I liked it. The world is a complex, multidimensional place. Never abandon the world to focus on your own narrow interests, but recognize that there are many ways to serve the world and many paths that are overexplored and many others that are underexplored. So this is not the end all be all. This is just me kind of presenting a craft that I'm really passionate about, and hopefully you've benefited a little bit from it. In closing, just to wrap things up and kind of recap everything, design and research should operate within tight constraints to save time and generate asymmetric insights. You weigh opportunity costs with napkin math. Research, so pivot to generative research practices, co-create with users. That's kind of cheating, honestly. Like, why guess like what the interface should look like when you can just draw it out with them? And product market fit, then use evaluative research to refine. So again, the evaluative research is testing to make sure that what you need to be true in order for your product to be like a real thing, that is something that exists in the space and can sort of like has a market. Is part of that evaluative piece. And then prototyping. So prototypes should not be viable. You like, especially early on, you're just testing ideas out and making them better. The purpose of prototyping is to get to a relative degree of certainty as quickly as possible. So the better best concept that we had talked about. And then test concepts and user behaviors first, specific solutions last, right? Because if you come up with that specific solution, you're actually kind of, you're already saying no to a whole bunch of user behaviors and concepts when you end on that specific solution first. So right here, I have further reading. So if you want to know about research, Just Enough Research, Erica Hall, Lean UX, Usability Testing 101, Relays User Research Series. This is a research series that I did with Katie Johnson, partner over at Consensus Relays, where we talk to user researchers at Facebook and all over the place. Really interesting stuff about prototyping. Sprint by Jake Knapp has kind of been the book that took over the space 4 or 5 years ago. They had a case study, actually, Fake It Till You Make It, with one of my favorite podcast series, Startup, which was fantastic. Fire Bullets, Then Cannonballs, and Great by Choice are two fantastic books by Jim Collins. They're really talking about small micro experiences, small tests in the market before you fire that cannonball. The cannonball is a really resource intensive project that you're kind of lobbing into the market and hoping that it makes a splash. These are both essentially presenting frameworks for how to like build really small market experiments to validate that you have a product. And then competing against luck. Clayton Christensen, one of my favorite authors. If you want kind of a crash course of how he thinks about products, Google or go to YouTube and search Clayton Christensen milkshake and Harvard, not HBR, not Harvard Business Review, maybe Harvard Business School, I think. He was the guy who came up with disruption and disruptors and innovator's dilemma. He's great. Passed away, I think it was this year. Competing Against Luck was the last book that he wrote, and it was very much about the sort of it was very much about this, about essentially saying that like oftentimes you're kind of just relying on luck. If you're building something without really like taking a strategic approach, you're competing against luck. You're hoping that the market is there when you get there, and he's really talking about strategies for how to know that the market is there before you even build the thing. So I will be sharing this deck in the Discord. So if you're not on our Discord, please join it. I think we can post the link in the Air Meet to join the Discord. I will be posting in the Fellowship channel. There we go. Arweave.chat Fellowship. Thank you, India. I will be posting this in that channel, maybe like 5-10 minutes after we're finished with the Air Meet. So little stick carrot thing there. Maybe join our Discord. I'll be posting other resources as well throughout the week. Finally, thank you so much. This is not a full minute. These talks I feel like are kind of lightning fast because I only have so much breath. So thanks everyone so much. I said we could do QAs. I don't see any questions per se in the chat. So I will just kind of like head to a couple of tables. We can chat and we can talk about product design or Arweave or anything really. I'm happy to discuss. So thanks everyone again for listening. Had so much fun. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll be on Discord. I'm also on Twitter. DMs are open. So DM me on Twitter, go to a Discord, any of those things. Again, thank you so much and have a wonderful, wonderful Friday.